Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's Paris Fashion Week and it's our first discussion of Paris. And what a lovely show to be talking about, because we're going to be discussing Dries Van Noten, which is always, I think, a very sort of beautiful, optimistic, just gorgeous show and really feminine, which is going to be interesting to talk about. I've got a great set of women here with me to unpick what we're going to be seeing in Paris, but also to talk about Dries Van Noten's aesthetic and his history as a designer. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves just to kick things off, starting with you, Anna.
I'm Anna Laub. I'm an ex-editor and founder and creative director of Prism Eyewear and Swimwear.
I'm Madelaine Levy. I'm a fashion writer and the editor-at-large of Bond magazine.
I'm Mimma Viglezio and I'm a consultant.
I'm going to start by asking if you guys can remember your first kind of interaction with Dries. Do you remember the first show you went to, or the first time you heard about the brand, or the first piece you bought? Does anyone have any kind of moments where they remember hearing people talk about it or anything like that? Everyone's looking at me blankly now.
Well, actually I do. I remember I was living in Rome, and it's probably 12, 13 years ago, or maybe 15. Shouldn't say these numbers, but and I went into one of the few boutiques in Rome that sells fashion, which we can call fashion.
Yeah.
And this woman, the owner or whatever, she kept saying, and Dries here and Dries there, and as if he was her husband or something. I remember saying, who's this Dries? So that was my first interaction. But first show I saw, no, I don't remember.
Did you like the pieces when you saw them?
I remember loving it.
Yeah.
But I remember the woman talking about him as if she had made him more than what I saw. But I don't remember. I don't even know how long he's been around.
Since like 86 he graduated, I think.
No,
80.
Well, when did he launch his brand?
He graduated in 80 and then he began designing in 86. It's a long time.
Yeah.
But there was that period of minimalism, which kind of, well, not minimalism, but in the 90s he kind of fell from favour a little bit and then kind of came back. Everyone's looking at me really blankly.
86, I'm amazed.
But he was part of the Antwerp Six and
Exactly,
launched with them coming to London and showing off their wares here, I think.
Yeah.
I don't have memories as far back as that. I was a bit too young for that.
Yeah.
I don't even think, I think he just crept into my mind somehow. I can't identify a certain point when I first heard of him. It should be said, in my wardrobe, it's not mine, but it's my partner's favourite sweater. Like, if he ever has the choice of kind of what I should put on, it's the kind of, it's simple, it's nothing special. Like a black sweater with the green details on it. And I think that for me is Dries somehow, because it's very refined in how it was produced and feminine, but it's also got a kind of streety feel to it and a very casual feel to it, and it's that kind of fashion with something casual to it that I always think of the most, I think, when I think of
that's
Dries.
interesting, because it's kind of, I think it's often people describe it as kind of ornate or eccentric, but I think it is, but in a really accessible way, like lovely sweaters or beautiful skirts.
It's definitely about the fabrics.
I agree.
That's what I associate with him. There is a lot of print, but it is like a lot of textural. He's developing all of those really interesting, like, luxurious fabrics, and I think that's what a lot of people associate with him.
And it's interesting that you both kind of nodded when you talked about this idea that he kind of crept into your consciousness, because he said before in interviews about not wanting to be kind of a big player, not wanting to sort of always be in the press, and he's a very quiet designer.
He's quite a subtle man, I think.
Exactly.
He doesn't behave as a celebrity or a diva. He's a great designer, but he stays a little bit on the margins of the, the circus. Yeah. But it's funny, you were talking about the texture and the fabrics. I absolutely adore what he does, but I think especially in winter, because I'm thinking about
to work
his
those
coats and his
like
sweaters, and it's always very, yummy. And I don't have much Dries for some reason. It's not a choice. I remember when I bought my first pair of Dries trousers in Paris at L'Éclaireur, again 10 or 12 years ago. But whenever I see a show, I think I should wear this more. It's really fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't think I feel in a similar way. Like, I don't know that many people who own a lot of Dries, but it's one of those brands, if you go to any department store, it's there. It's got a massive presence. All the buyers love it. They all travel to Antwerp to buy the collection. Like, it's quite an interesting brand in that way, because, we go through like these minimalism cycles, he's still there, he still has a huge presence, people still respect him from season to season, and it's like quite a quiet presence. Like we're talking about how he's kind of crept into all of our kind of minds. I mean, I don't remember the first show, but I remember starting to go to his shows in a way, and it was always, it's always at the beginning of Paris, and it's always quite a powerful show and quite a powerful image, and almost not even related to anything anyone else is doing, but somehow feels
that's
right.
What I think it's amazing.
It's got nothing to do with anything that's happening that week, but it always feels quite right, feels like
relevant.
Right for the moment and relevant, and it's always got quite a powerful message as well, which is, especially at the moment, there's so many brands that are like very minimal, very quiet about what they're doing. It's quite hard to do something which is such a statement, but make it feel right.
And yet, even if it's all but minimal, I don't really recognize Dries Van Noten on people or...
Yeah, I wonder if that's why
I never think, she's wearing Dries. It's funny because that's the same thing. It's not a precise look.
Yeah. I think you do if they're wearing a particular if they're wearing like last season, you perhaps look at it. But I think it's one of those brands that people. It's interesting what you said about your partner, because I think it is the case that people buy the pieces and they are really timeless. It is one of those brands that you buy and you wear something from 10 years ago and then you mix it with something, which I think is quite interesting because I feel like the shows he does, they are quite seasonal in a respect. You can look and be like, okay, that was from that season, but it never feels like it's designed to make you want it and then throw it away. And I think to get that balance right feels really, really smart.
Because it's not trendy. Yet relevant. Sorry.
There was a time when he sold everything he showed on the catwalk, and that was the retail collection. There was never anything added. I don't know if that's still valid, if that's still how they work, but I think it's very interesting.
They say it's still how they work.
Is that still?
But they have a huge kind of, I think they always sell what's on the runway, but they do have a bigger commercial collection as well.
So there is more there, because it didn't used to be like that. It's quite interesting as a statement. And when it comes to Dries and trends, everyone says they don't follow trends. I think he really has set a few very kind of large overriding trends, like the meeting between couture and casual. It's really something that he did long before a lot of other fashion brands started going in that direction. Florals, something geometric like patterns, prints. A lot of the trends we see at the moment, actually, he was very early in coming.
I felt like this season there's been a bit of an ode to Dries. I really felt it at Jonathan Saunders, and I don't think it was kind of ripping off Dries, but it felt very Driesy, even some of the metallic, some of the shirting and the way it was kind of twisted into floral. And I think it's interesting we keep using this word like quiet, like he's crept up on us all, but I think he has had a huge impact on fashion. But
he's an influencer for sure.
He's
one of those designers that marks other designers. But I think, for what you were saying, it makes me think a little bit of the attitude that Miuccia has with fashion. She does her own thing. Then you can like it, understand or not. And I think Dries is the same. It's not like, he's following the 17th trend or the denim trend. No. You never know what to expect. And I think Miuccia is a little bit the same. Thank God for Miuccia.
It's the location as well. He's showing in Paris, but he doesn't live in Paris or Milan or New York or
He's
London.
in Antwerp, right?
He lives, or outside in this huge, for him, his garden is probably more important than, or at least the interviews. I haven't interviewed him personally, but I've been the editor commissioning interviews, and that's what he wants to talk about more than anything.
Recently, I read a long interview of his in his garden. Where was that? Like 6 months ago, last season, where we had a very beautiful interview.
Right,
One of the around the exhibition.
And they've extended it.
That exhibition was so phenomenal, which I thought was really interesting. I do want to ask you guys' opinion about this, because everyone talks about how fashion exhibitions are kind of having this huge moment. I know there have been fashion exhibitions for sort of as long as time, and they've always been very popular. But this real kind of vogue for them post Savage Beauty. And I'm interested as to why you think that the Dries one was so successful. Do you think it was because there was so much art and other content in there?
I haven't been yet, and I was actually hoping to go like in about 2 days when we go to Paris. But I'm really happy that they extended it, and they obviously did because it's done so well. But I think what everyone has told me, the people who've encouraged me to go, is that it's really about the process, and it's not. Some designer exhibitions, like the McQueen was so amazing because there's so many pieces there that were almost like sculptures, you know, and couture and really, amazing things to see up close. But a lot of people have said about his exhibition, I don't know if you guys have been, but that it's more about the process and the inspiration. And I think that's a really interesting thing for people to see that aren't involved in fashion to even understand that it's not like someone sitting around going like, oh, I like this pink, or you know, there is a process to it and the inspirations behind it and all his travels and how it's like worked into his collections, which I'm really interested to see.
Yeah, and it's not something, there tends to be this idea with fashion exhibitions that it's just about the garment, you know, and they're kind of put on a mannequin and that's, and I do think it's interesting to see kind of a dress next to a piece of art, next to this, next to that. Have you seen the exhibition?
No, I mean, I've seen a lot of pictures from it. Yeah. Isn't it also a little bit what Dries is about? Like, if you work harder and do more research, and if you spend 2 years really putting your heart into creating a beautiful exhibition, and you're as knowledgeable and as obviously intelligent that he is, you will get something amazing. I mean, not many designers, I think, if they're part of a large business, or if they don't, like the way that he does, you know, if they don't own their business, they might not have the freedom to spend as much time as that on an exhibition, which is something that doesn't necessarily sell clothes as directly. And he just seems to be able to work differently, and maybe the exhibition is a bit the same thing. Yeah. It seems very, very rich and very worked through.
It's interesting, that notion of having time to do things properly, because I feel like research is something that the fashion system and the way it operates, with the kind of real pace and the constant drops and constant expectations for sort of new collections and collaborations and all that, it's not really allowing anyone any time to research anymore. As kind of people who followed fashion, do you notice that sometimes, and you're not doing that either?
Completely, especially people that don't have huge teams, but also those that have huge teams that then don't do the research. So it's someone else doing it and reporting, so it's not the same. And I guess we'll be talking about that a lot with, you know, Gautier giving up and etc. etc. There is again this thing about, is it too much, you know, too pre-collection, too collection, then men, and then couture, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it's like, also, I don't think you can be creative every 5 minutes just because a clock is telling you. And I like, Dries doesn't do pre-collections, if I'm not mistaken, right? Doesn't do pre. So he, as you said, you know, he's independent and he can earn as much money or as little money as he wants, and you can feel the research behind this fashion. And it's like when you read a novel, you know, some writers are not only good writers, but they research, and so they have something to tell, and some others they just write, and you feel the difference. And the same is here, you know, he's very intellectually engaged. And it's fantastic. And it's fantastic because of that. And I think the fact that he doesn't do 1,000 collections a year helps.
And I want to pick up on something we were just discussing, which was about research and the importance of research, because I thought it was a really fascinating topic. And we were talking obviously about the pace of fashion, how hard that is. And I just want to get your guys' opinion. How do you think that we can encourage young designers to consider research? Can we even do that? Are they doing it enough? Is the pace just not going to allow for that anymore? Because if you read so many articles about the work of young designers, it says, you know, or if you speak to tutors at colleges, they always say that young people are trying to research using Google, that people aren't putting that same focus on kind of going through and looking at proper imagery. Do you think this is a real problem in fashion, or is it just kind of a sign of the times?
I think it's the time thing. I think when people are being, from day one now, designers are, you know, kind of forced to do what, I mean, I don't do full collections, but you know, buyers want you to do 4 collections a year. And in order to keep your business going, you're trying to balance what these people who are keeping your business afloat want you to do, in a sense. So, you know, I mean, I personally do 3 because I feel that's plenty, and I can put resort and spring summer together and do it, or almost do a lot of research and then split it in 2, so that, you know, I have enough time to do enough research to do a thorough collection. Because as you say, otherwise, you know, you're just there's not enough time, and in order to really, you know, develop new fabrics and do everything in a really solid way, you do need the time and you to do proper research.
But did you feel that pressure from the buyers sort of right from the start?
I think it's quite a recent thing anyway. I mean, I didn't feel it from the start because I don't think it existed 4 years ago. I think the last 2 years, buyers only just started to prioritise pre-season collections. I think they started doing them, you know, when designers started doing them, they started buying them, and they started to realise, well, this is the more commercial collection, so they started saving budget. So they'll save like 80% of their budget for a pre-collection, and then they'll add in pieces from the main collections to kind of freshen things up, and then that's meant to be, you know, the more high fashion end of things. but the stuff they're selling is the pre-collections.
Completely.
I mean,
So
it's really hard because
more.
you can't. You obviously you want it to be, even, you know, from our perspective, it's boring to do really commercial things all the time anyway. So of course you want to research things to the full extent and come up with new ideas all the time. Like you say, it's hard. So you can't come up with
I think more and more we're going towards a fashion show season which is more publicity oriented, where especially those that can afford it. I mean, not everybody is Chanel, but will do, as you say, pieces that come out of their research, their DNA, what they have inside, and then there are fewer pieces, maybe once a year, and they will go in magazines and in whatever, you know, images. But everybody's buying pre, and so I think I've spoken with many young designers that are not going to show. They didn't show this season, but they're going to do a pre-collection because they also need money to eat and research, and so they need to sell. So, you know, again, it's the usual dichotomy with money and image. You still need to do clothes that sell, and you probably know that. And then maybe you can afford research. But also I think some designers are lucky enough to have that inside of them. You know, some people are intellectually deep and they have their own personal cut. They read books, they go to movies, they travel normally. And so they don't really need to do research because they have a lot of imagery and inputs or whatever stimulus, whilst others, they need to sit down and copy sometimes because they don't have enough of that inside, right?
Yeah, I think it's that, I mean, because that word research, as you said, everyone can Google things and get, I don't know, if you want to be inspired by 60s parties on the Côte d'Azur or whatever, and you can get page after page of images from that. So the very specific research and doing kind of something that's historical in the sense of, oh, I'll do something again that was done then. Everyone can do that, and I think a lot of designers do, but it's that ambling, like, derivative research that is just more when chance can get to play a kind of role. That thing of going to the library and just kind of sweeping through things and taking something out, and the specific research I think they still do. I do think that they, whether it's through Google or libraries, but it's more that all those great things that happen when you have a bit of time to breathe. I think it's partly what we're saying about
it's the time to amble around and go to galleries and travel and do things like, it's not specific research.
That's a luxury, but that goes
you're
deep
researching
inside.
life, you know.
Because Google sometimes
you
just
have
go
time to do that.
In Google sometimes you just go too quickly and you lose. You're not studying. But also I think one thing is research, because you had the idea of doing, like, you know, the 60 around the pool in Capri, and so you just Google that. One thing is getting an idea because you did research or because you have some time
like something in
that's very different, because if Downton Abbey become famous, then everybody will know that it's going back to accessories and elegance, and that's not research. That's like, oh yeah, Downton Abbey is fashionable, so let's you know, do research around, you know, beginning of 20th century. Another thing is, like, I traveled to Morocco and suddenly I discovered an amazing kind of red, and I want to do something around it. That's a different thing.
So that kind of,
right?
For sure.
That needs time.
But that you need time to do. Like, you
and
need
money.
to not be in your studio, like, trying to get something finished or doing, you know, you need a team, you know, that's time to,
and
like,
we're forcing
amble around.
designers towards the former, aren't we? We're forcing them to say, I'm going to come up with an idea every season and then I will do some research around that. We're not letting them happen upon things or take a chance upon things, which I guess is quite interesting actually if you think about. I thought it was really interesting this season that Christopher Kane's collection was all inspired by research he'd done as a student, and it was unused ideas from when he was at St. Martin's.
And you can see the talent of the collection. I mean,
which showed how amazing he was. But then I also thought it was really, really interesting that a designer who does have such sort of brilliant ideas as Christopher does, and I think he is a guy who has great ideas, was returning to when he actually had time when he was a student. I thought that really said something, and maybe it's just chance that, you know, he happened upon some stuff, but it made me kind of sad in a way, because I thought to be that busy that you kind of all designers kind of like yearn for their student years, but also that you think that your ideas then were better than an idea you could have now. I think that's quite interesting.
He probably had loads of amazing ideas that he never had the chance to develop because he didn't have the team or the time or the money, and now he's got a huge company behind him that will pay for the development, or like maybe had an idea to develop something that he just could never have done at the time. And there are all these amazing ideas that were kind of unused, and they've been sitting on the side, and he's been waiting for a moment to do them. And he's just kind of pulled them back out because he knows it's something he always wanted to do, maybe, and he just found his notes, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. It just makes me sad to think that, you know, I think it's natural that you always kind of like wish to be a student again, especially if you were doing, if you were at somewhere like St Martin's and that freedom that you have. But isn't it sad that we put our designers under such pressure that they all think that the favourite times when they were at St Martin's, when, you know, they probably had no money, they were doing collections on a shoestring, and then...
It's not really sad. I think there's something romantic about that.
Yeah, there's no pressure.
It is great to be a student, though.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is. That's your job, to do research. So
yeah, I would say, I mean, going back to Dries, I think with his research and what's so great about it is that, yes, it can be historic, and he can dig deep into, I mean, for the exhibition, for example, he really went into art history, but he does also include pop culture in a very nice way, and that's like, comes like little sparkle of something that just freshens things up. It can be rave culture like last season, but he's, I mean, throughout time he's always kind of had that clash between the historic and the much fresher and younger. That's also, of course, history now, but it's contemporary history, the history of popular culture. And I love that about him. That he's very open to that.
Do you think part of his appeal is that he is a very quiet designer and that he's not a great showman? Because I think you find his references all the more intriguing because of that, and you kind of want to know more, which I think really suits him given those diverse references. Do we kind of like our designers a bit to be a bit that Phoebe Philo model of kind of...
It's refreshing.
Yeah.
Everyone wants 5 minutes of fame today, so
it's nice,
refreshing to have like a quiet talent that you're not.
I just wonder how much that's been a part of the appeal and made us kind of consider the clothes more, because they're never fully explained to you, which I always find quite interesting, you know, when you're given the references, but there's a lot you can read, and I love that.
Well, I always like a little bit of mystery in people that are in the spotlight, because, you know, if you shout all the time, then we don't even want to listen anymore. So I do like that, but he's one of those designers that speaks through his collections. And I mean, it's Phoebe, but it's also, again, Miuccia, but it's also, in a way, Nicolas Ghesquière. I mean, there are others that talk less and they just...
Well, it does seem like the real greats talk less. Raf Simons as well.
Raf Simons, exactly. I mean, we mentioned among the greatest, so... No pressure, but you know, I don't think you need to talk very much when you have something really to say, and it's the same in life.
But it's also, you know, there for wearing.
You
don't actually always have to be like, well, this jumper was all about this, and you know, maybe someone just wants to buy it and wear it.
I think that's...
Do you know what I mean? And sometimes it's...
And that's obviously so important to him, just to have the stuff on.
I wonder who's the Dries Van Noten woman. Who's
that's
the
it. I don't know anyone.
I don't think I think that's what makes it so good. Is I think most people probably have a piece of Dries. Well, not most people. That's ridiculous. But a lot of people probably have a couple of pieces that they mix with loads of different things. I think you do get people that are very Dries.
But I wonder if there are people that like, I'm very Dries Van Noten.
I think there are.
All of us probably have more than one brand.
I think there are women that have that's like their whole wardrobe,
collection.
Because you wouldn't. I mean, every department store in the world you go to, and there's the most enormous Dries department. Like, who's buying
But also
that?
every store, which is really a fashion store, they will carry Dries Van Noten. So,
I mean, I will never
who's
forget...
wearing Dries Van Noten? That's the show.
I will never forget talking to Louise Wilson about, it must have been autumn-winter 10, that was very geometric and very patterned. And she, I mean, in a way, I think she really liked the collection, but she was also like, I can't imagine any of his clients wanting to look like their mates. They are never going to buy this.
That was very Louise Wilson to say.
But I think there's that interesting thing between brands that manage to like really get a core shopper, which I think, you know, as we've said, I'm sure there is a Dries woman, but also they manage to kind of pepper the wardrobes of lots and lots of different women.
Probably.
And I think that's, there's a lot of brands that are brilliant, you know, like Miu Miu or Prada or whatever. I don't think there's that same... I think Dries has really owned that idea of having lots of... Like Marnie's quite a good example of it as well.
It's a similar... I think it's like a similar customer in a way, Marnie and Dries.
definitely.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's funny, I always put Marnie more in the Prada department as kind of woman. Maybe coming from an Italian culture, you know, it's always been the intellectual, more minimal fashionista.
So I don't
They
think
always
Marnie
put
is
Prada and
I don't think of
Marnie
it as
together.
minimal either. I think of the women that I've known in the past that are kind of maybe women I work with or whatever that maybe a little older, and they wore Marnie and Dries, and they're all quite similar.
But I think Marnie is boxier,
pattern
whereas Dries is more... Like, I wear a lot of Marnie, but I wouldn't wear Dries because to me, it just doesn't suit me. It looks more elegant. It's I imagine it being for an older woman, whereas I know Marnie is sort of a lot of older women buy it, but you can kind of get away with it. With Dries, it just looked like wearing...
It's very,
Like
it's
my
very...
mom's clothes.
But it's not like that. I mean, he was really early in putting things like a sweater with those long skirts and things like that. So, I mean, again, he did start trends like that, and that there is a casualness to it.
Yeah.
I see it for anybody, you know, exactly. You can style it the way you want.
I
and you
have
can
pieces, but they're like t-shirts.
Yeah.
You know, like interesting t-shirts that you wouldn't even have thought he did, but he does. And
But I think that's the thing, the collections are like huge, aren't they? And there's so much, and that's part of the appeal. I really want to look at the show, but I've got one more question, which is I want to talk about brands that are kind of privately owned, because I think it's something we perhaps don't talk enough about the business side on these panels. And while I've got you, Mimma, because I know this is kind of your forte.
Yes,
kind of,
go ahead.
But it's just, I think it's really amazing that brands like Rick Owens and Dries can be around where they're not controlled or bought by anyone else, they're just kind of privately run.
Well, it's very interesting what you say, because I think, unfortunately, probably that's not possible anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, you know, when Mr. Armani, which is one of the biggest example of a brand privately owned, which is worth probably 10 billion or something like that, started, there was room for that. And if you mentioned Dries and Rick, they're both, you know, older, they're not young designer. And I don't want to say it's not possible anymore, because it makes me mad, and because I think there is so much talent out there that should succeed. But unless they're bought by someone or financed by someone, they probably will struggle. I mean, at the time it was more possible, and so these two examples you mentioned, they have the money to continue, you know. Now it's a cash flow thing. Now they've sold enough, they can buy the right fabric and produce, and because some people cannot afford to produce a show until they sold it, but until you produce it you can't. Exactly. So I think it's more and more difficult. I think personally that there are too many brands out there, and there are so useless brand that shouldn't even be called brand, and I'm not going to mention, but there are many in every city, and it's a pity, because then you've got some young brands or young talent that really could succeed, because you can see they have something to say and they won't, because and also honestly, with all these collections, nobody has the money or the will. I mean, some people do, but the money and the will to buy every 2 months a new wardrobe. I mean, there are so many brands, so many things, so many collections. Even if you really want to be all the time, you know, wearing the last things, and it's so expensive. It's getting more and more expensive. I really wonder who's selling what. Do you guys have an answer? Because
you do have a kind of exponential growth in high net worth individuals in the world as well.
Did you see the results of the groups? Did you all see the results?
Those people also don't have. It's strange, because there's so many brands, and then people who are maybe high net worth, like you say, they're not like so fashion aware. So there are a lot of brands that, I mean, you know, you can walk past on Sloane Street or whatever, and you're, how do they afford the rent? Who is buying like a £10,000 bag from this store?
Exactly.
Like, and there are a lot of brands like that. And then there are all the other brands that are, you know, super high fashion that the fashion industry people are buying. But there's a lot of brands, a lot of competition. Like you said, there's a lot of products.
But the four biggest groups have posted negative results. The last one was Prada two days ago, and yesterday I had to suspend the stock because it went down so much. I mean, it's not doing that well. And on the other hand, there are unknown names that maybe we only know or few people know that are thriving, because I mean, it's a very long discussion, but the whole industry is changing because the consumer behavior has changed dramatically. And when you have LVMH, Kering, Richemont and Prada posting negative results. I don't remember another time where it happened.
Yeah.
So maybe someone needs to start rethinking.
I find that really interesting as well, because I don't know if you guys would agree, but I feel like there's been a remarkable lack of reportage of that in the fashion press. There's been a lot in the business press, but not so much, and it's really strange because it's like,
I think people don't want to.
But then how weird is that?
That's the bubble, isn't it? Everyone's like,
everyone's writing all these reports and no one's really talking about it.
But have the fashion press ever talked about it? I mean, a fashion critic is not supposed to talk about results, but about hem lengths. The magazines, they're supposed to give you beautiful images.
Yeah.
So I don't know, did they ever? I mean,
I mean, art critics don't really report on how the gallery world is doing, so I guess
exactly.
I think there's also, I mean, and actually Dries is part of that. The other kind of sad or worrying part of that development or that evolution is that just like the rest of culture, it's becoming very much about whose child you are. Like everyone now who is becoming a celebrity or anything is like the daughter of or the son of somebody. Dries is actually also, he comes from a family with, he's got a long heritage of not creating fashion but creating clothes, and also a heritage that had capital to it. Alexander Wang is very much, I mean, he can produce the way that he can because he's got his family behind him. And I guess that's the new aristocracy of the cultural world, with very little support from other entities. It becomes about, well, your background rather than anything else.
It's like a production support. The people who are doing well and have built their businesses really, really fast are the people who had production owned already and in place, because it's hard to pay. I mean, also buyers every season, you know, they need to make their results, so they want, you know, they want collections, they want discounts, they want longer paying terms. And in the meantime, you know, designers have to pay for the production. They're not getting paid in the meantime. I mean, there's a lot of things that they want. So, you know, it always goes back to the designer having to pay out. It's really hard, cash flow wise.
Which is what I find really interesting with young brands as well, because I think, understandably, and it's really important discussion, there's so much reportage around like the tuition fee hikes, and everyone's like, wasn't this awful for young creatives? But there doesn't seem to be enough concentration of like, well, but even once they get out of university, if you want to be a fashion designer, like, you need a family who can handle your production or who will float you for the first like 5 seasons where you don't sell anything.
Well, first while you're doing internships,
exactly.
Well, you're not allowed to even hire interns now for more than a month. So.
No, that's true. That's not really the case. I think also when it comes to that kind of overproduction of product, I mean, that's the success of the Outnet and Gilt Group, and I mean that's where it goes. It's flushed out through discount websites.
It's so unethical, isn't it? Though?
And it's a little bit catch-22 because you know, there was a time where the Mrs. B of the world or Joyce Ma were discovering talent and pushing it in their country territory, and they had a voice. Now it's a time where the buyers, they have to produce results, and so everybody goes safe for what everybody's talking about, and everybody then is wearing. I mean,
like statement sweaters. Isn't it?
I don't know. It's very complicated, but I think the real problem is that there is too much and too many collections, because there was a time where everything was booming and China was in need of fashion, and so everybody was producing to feed these, you know, people, and now there's too much.
I think it's fashion's become, you know, part of popular culture in a way. So I mean, it's, again, it's like quite a kind of wider discussion, but, but in a way, everyone grows up and everyone wants to be in fashion now, whereas, you know, 20
and the high street
ago,
is taking over because they're doing the same for cheaper. But then you're like, why would I pay that £2,500 for a pair of, I don't know, a jacket, where, I mean, I like well done and well cut, but I don't want it to be like so last season 6 months later, and it's expensive. It's getting more and more expensive. And
well, it's not respectful to the shopper, isn't it? We've talked a lot about that on the panels this season, which I found quite interesting, this notion of designers who respect their shopper and designers that don't. And I think it's interesting what we were all saying about Dries, is there feels like there's a lot of empathy and respect and understanding of the shopper and interesting dialogue there. But I think we've seen so many collections that just seem to like have no even social conscience towards people that will wear it and buy it, like Moschino we were talking about before, and that kind of there's really no sense of like, am I providing something that people will love? Am I thinking about use? Am I thinking about like longevity? It's all just about fashion and trend and
for its sake.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not a sense of what that garment's life will be beyond just that immediate visual impact, which I think is really weird.
There's a place for just doing something fun. I mean, if everyone was serious about, pieces. I mean, of course, there's an importance to creating things that have a long lifespan, and I think the idea of all of these luxury brands originally was that you bought something that was more expensive because you knew, because it was Prada, it meant it was well made. That's why it cost more. Now it's kind of happened the other way around, like because it's that brand it costs more, as opposed to,
it's true.
and that's the wrong way round. So
really
that was why people spent more money before, and now it's kind of been turned around. But I mean, something like, Jeremy Scott, I mean, he's just trying to have fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you can do that every season. I mean, he's done it again.
It just scares me that high fashion becomes
I don't even think it's funny anymore.
What's that?
I don't even think it's funny anymore.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you can
expected.
do that every season,
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what, I don't know. And I also believe that fashion is an art that needs some aesthetic, and there's some stuff out there that it's probably futuristic or whatever, talking about the future. It's not aesthetically appealing. And I think if I'm supposed to wear it, or you're supposed to, even if it's not my cup of tea, but it has to be talking about beauty somehow, or proportions, and some things are really, you think they're made really to displease the eye. Yeah. And I'm probably old-fashioned, and I'm probably, I don't know, not modern in this, but I don't understand it. It doesn't, it's not political, it's not philosophical, it's not, I don't know, for me. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do.
For its sake, I'm not interested.
Should we look at Dries to restore our faith in fashion? Because I feel like we've all got very down on it. The runway was made of moss, which is quite lovely, given like grass and moss.
I saw the invite was like a see-through case with moss, and it was really nice.
I think there's something quite nice about, I think Fashion Week, whenever you're there, the big thing that everyone's always saying is like, I just want to, like, have a lie down, eat some fruit, eat some vegetables. So I imagine people have found this very nourishing to be out just to see some green amongst all
it's like forest or natural life.
It's interesting you were talking about rave, because that's kind of a thing that we're seeing even through this, that kind of hippie, slightly hedonistic thing that he can do very well.
It makes me think more of Native American.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think there's always like a cultural travelling kind of reference.
Yeah, there's a real sense of someone well-travelled. But I think that's interesting to a luxury shopper, because I feel like there was a while where a luxury shopper did want to look well-travelled, and I think that's gone kind of out of fashion now, which is quite interesting. I feel like there was a while where it seemed very luxurious to say, oh, this is made here, or this was from here, I bought this there, and I don't know if people think about that anymore.
I mean, I think the thing about something like this is, you're not going to find you won't find this look or these materials on the high street. You can't, and that's the difference between what he does and, he's kind of in a way justifying what he does. I mean, he's not trying to do that, but the pieces do justify it on its own, because you can't buy that for 50 quid at Henny's. I mean, you'd think, and that's the idea, is that he's developed these materials. They're beautiful materials. You won't find them anywhere else, and that's his kind of.
It's interesting what you say about the t-shirts, because even the t-shirts are like that. He'll use like velo or lovely fabric. It's interesting because it's got that kind of bohemian thing that everyone's doing. Why has everyone gone so kind of hippie in 70s this season?
Everyone wants to chill out. Everyone's got a relaxed vibe this season.
It really, really has. Everything's gone really, really hippie. I don't think I'm ready for the return of boho. I don't want to see that.
It's no, I don't either, and I thought the Milan 70s was really annoying and boring.
Did you?
But apart from a few, as usual. But I think there is this there has been like 3 or 4 years where fashion was really uncomfortable, like huge heels and tight stuff, and I mean,
and
it
even
was like
minimal stuff like white coats.
One couldn't wait to be at home to hang out like this.
Take your shoes off.
And and like in everything now, the reaction is like they're wearing slippers, and it's not even trainers anymore. They're literally in like swimming pool slippers.
Yeah.
And because everybody needs to be now comfortable. But there are some pieces here that are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
like
it's beautiful
the
collection.
prints, the colors. I can't see the material.
It just
I
all
guess.
looks. It
Look
always
at
looks
that.
really silky. You kind of want to like
Number
lay down
30.
in it. You know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like kind of 3D.
Well, because it's that pajama-y thing that he does so well, and yeah, those kind of feathery looks on 31 are beautiful.
The problem with this relaxed fashion is that there's some things that if you don't have very long legs, you still need heels. But then you wear it with heels and it looks so old-fashioned.
Yeah, that's.
So it's a little bit of a, unfair thing for women that don't look like models.
But I think that's an interesting thing where heels just don't look that current anymore.
No, they look so old-fashioned.
Yeah, when you see I was at an event and people were wearing heels, and I was just looking at the girls that were wearing flats looked so cool, and all the girls wearing heels, and it really made me think. And I kind of came home and never wanted to wear heels again, because it is that it just looks like it just feels really.
But there are some
jarring.
situations where you have to, or it's better to, and nobody put them on the catwalk, or very few people. I think Miuccia had heels with those socks. I think it was with heels.
They were really high with the socks. Yeah.
I'm sure
Well,
somebody will
Ford
come and turn it
put
all
women
around
on.
and put us all back in heels, of course.
Yeah.
Because somebody will come up with.
But
heels
look at
that
this.
just
Look at this.
so
prints.
beautiful.
So beautiful. It's interesting as well because the men's that we just saw was very almost quite rigid. It was all about ballet, and there was a lot of movement in the clothes, but there was a kind of real sense of strictness in the palette and some of the tones, and then the freedom came through in a pattern which was almost like an illustration of a dancer, whereas this is completely different, much more
he's
natural.
often letting menswear kind of slide into women's wear, but this I can't see the connection. That was quite natural materials, I think, as well.
Exactly,
and like some
but
linen
that
and
feels
stuff,
refreshing as well, because I've got so used to seeing the women's wear and being like, well, I know that I've seen this thought before.
I definitely prefer what he does for winter usually, but and this is no exception. But I think if we have to embrace the 70s bohemian hippie look, this is probably one of the best we've seen. Not completely my cup of tea, but really good.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah.
I just think it feels more convincing than when, I did actually quite like the Gucci collection, but I think it feels so much more convincing when he does it, because you imagine that he does love to sit outside and that he does want his women to he's always wanted his women to be able to kind of wear a great relaxed pajama trouser, whereas a couple of seasons ago the Gucci woman wasn't in that vibe at all, so it doesn't feel quite as authentic.
There's also something very specific and almost fluid in the patterns that I can't quite put. I mean, yes, it's abstract, but it's more than that. There's also something really loose in how they seem to have been created, which is very beautiful. It's always difficult to react like this just instantly, and I must say this is really one of the shows that I can go kind of, oh, I'm so sad not to be there, because the music is always very, very important. The location is very important. I mean, for a lot of shows you can watch them kind of like this in pictures or in live streams, and it doesn't make that much of a difference.
But Dries does something.
With Dries, do you know what the music was?
I don't know what the music was, but one thing
musicians lately.
He has had a lot of that. I don't know what the music was. Can we try and have a look? But I do know all the models kind of came out and they were lying down in all the grass, like kind of just reclining up against the moss, which is quite interesting.
Oh, wow.
Which I find kind of quite funny, because I'm sure he didn't know this when putting together the collection, or even doing the kind of orchestrating how the show was going to be done. But given how many people are doing 70s and relaxed, but it still looks really, really done. And you could imagine it would look so bad, some of those 70s look, if you actually got the models to lie down in the clothes, and how odd they'd look. And it's like he's really emphasising that he's committing to that kind of idea of relaxation.
You were mentioning Gucci before, and rightly enough saying this looks more authentic, because Dries is the master of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I just rewatched this winter show before coming to, and the color, the coolness, the not trying too hard. It's all there. I mean, this is very different from his winter, but it's not.
His last winter wasn't my favourite. I tend to prefer the summer. I don't know why. I think I love that sense of kind of clothes falling off. I find that I think he does that very well. That sense of. Sorry, have you found the music?
Apparently
Bird noises. Oh.
Oh, so no music, just bird noises. Amazing.
Oh, okay. So really, escape into nature.
Yeah, go to the forest.
And I guess, I mean, it's not as maybe tasteful as some. I mean, sometimes he does. No, he's not a minimalist, but he will balance his love for pattern with some minimalist pieces. There's nothing at all of that, and I guess that's what nature does. It doesn't hold back really. It's like
that's interesting. I think that idea of overgrownness has gone into this collection. You know, like kind of too much and being slightly wild and uncontrolled. Because it's a very different view of nature. It's not, you know, before he's done a kind of a dark flower or something, but it's still quite controlled. Whereas even just the moss, you know, moss is something that you don't.
It's rough.
Yeah, it's rough and it does its own thing, and I think that's quite interesting. Can we see some of the close-ups?
Do you still think it's for a grown-up woman?
No, I think this is a lot younger.
It's very
I think
young.
there's pieces for all different ages.
I think it's very modern, you know, and it's there are many people that are doing prints and colors like he does, like Etro, for instance. And I think the difference between him and the others is that it's very relevant and very modern and very Dries. It's.
But I do always think it's always a pieces collection. I always look at his work and think, you know, that's for a slightly older shopper, that's for a younger shopper, and I think the skill is how it's all put together on the runway and how great that vision looks. But it's interesting what we're talking about right at the start with it being kind of, you know, a very commercial offering, and it really is. You know, you look at it and you're like, that would be for an older woman, that would be for a committed Dries shopper, that would be to get someone to buy into the brand. That's more in response to trend, you know, that kind of a thing. And I know he's not a trend-driven designer, but I think there's always
but he's not far from all the others with this one.
Even just like there's lots of great bombers in here, which will probably sell really, really well to a younger shopper. So
that's the thing. The pieces sit well on their own. Even if together, it's a lot. You can probably, buy a dress on its own or a jacket.
It's a bit overwhelming.
It's overwhelming together. Like you say, it looks overgrown in a way. He's like piled everything
I really
together.
like that because I think it feels really overgrown and overwhelming. But it makes it less seasonal somehow because I feel like there's so much in there that I can really remember this collection, but I actually think if I saw someone wearing a piece from it, I wouldn't know what season it was from, which I quite like. I feel like so many collections now, they're almost like the designer's kind of trying to shout a vision in your face. And I know everyone's saying, I want like clear ideas. That's the great designers have, like a clear vision, a clear sense of identity. And I think you do want that, but these collections where it's just like, every piece is so identifiably like autumn, winter 14.
It becomes very dated easily. Well, I mean, this looks very. I mean, if you didn't say who it was, probably your first guess would be that this was Dries.
Yeah, it would be at least in the list of three.
Which sounds like an obvious thing to say, but that doesn't happen in fashion anymore. You know, so many collections, you look at them and you're like, if I didn't have Gucci written above it, or Gucci's getting a lot of airtime on this, but if it didn't have like this or that above it, I would have no idea what it was.
Except, again, Prada. I mean, you were looking at that collection. It could only be Prada. Simone could only be. Christopher Kane as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I was watching it and it couldn't be anybody else.
I mean, I think there are a lot. I mean, some people have seasons that are a bit off and you're like, this doesn't really show like their talent or what their DNA is, and then, you know, you feel like they've had an off season. Yeah. But I mean, for sure, we're like, before we were saying, we can't quite identify exactly what his DNA is, but when you look at this is...
I think it's like a richness, it's quite tonal. I always think of his DNA, it's certain kind of patterns and tones and mixes. Do we like the collection? Do you like it, Madeleine?
I like it.
Yes, I like it. I like the way it's styled, with that, what we have been talking about, the saturation of it. Yeah. And I like it as a response to it is somehow. So you're all doing prints well.
Yeah, I'm going to do more than you. Yeah.
I really like that. I mean, some of it is on the verge of ugly.
Yeah.
It's funny.
But
it's so wrong that it's right?
But I mean, that's what great designers do. They kind of teach us what can become beautiful that has been seen as ugly. The artistic part of it. And I mean, it does clash universes in an almost it's almost a humorous way, with some of the most kind of high Ashbury hippie stuff, going Polynesian, going Asian down there with the kind of raw silk trousers, etc.
There's something very quintessentially Dries about it, but I also think there's something very modern about it as well, because if you think, I don't think by any means he's responding to kind of like street style culture, but there is this sense of kind of that idea of dressing in like 3 or 4 different prints and knowing that will make a massive impact has become a real thing. And you look at this collection, it does kind of fit with, I think, that kind of more is more maximalist spirit that I think it has become more and more okay to kind of put.
And a lot of people have been doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like pairing lots of prints, but I mean, this is a very nonchalant, kind of relaxed way. I mean, his girl is really cool, even if it's it could be for a much older woman or a much younger woman, but it's a very kind of confident nonchalance. It's like totally cool, you know, relaxed.
And I do imagine it's a kind of collection that some people will have found really overwhelming, and I quite like that he's like not holding back. He's not trying to do tasteful.
I think it's more overwhelming than I don't know. I don't feel like it's more.
I mean, he does have this thing. I mean, it's more done in the menswear usually, not this season, but in certain season, he has picked up this. I mean, menswear is usually not clashing prints, for example. It's not about any. I mean, it's kind of peacock, and he does have a penchant for that kind of menswear that is a bit more ostentatious and a bit more.
It's kind of a dandy,
daring when it
like
comes to clashing things, which, I mean, here you can see it in kind of full bloom in the women's wear.
That was a good pun there, related to nature. Very nice. Full bloom. Tickled me.
Sorry, not intended.
Do we think that this is one of those collections? I think it's interesting with Dries because I feel like there are collections. He's not a designer. I think people do have favourite collections from him, but I don't think he's a designer where people are like, oh, do you remember Autumn Winter 12? Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Do we think that this is kind of part of his vision, is trying to do something that is going to stand out slightly more for the season and is going to make him more of a kind of a slightly more seasonal player, or is he trying to do stuff that's just as timeless, do we think? Because I think there's an element of this which it's very kind of, I think he's trying to make quite an iconic image. You know, we talked about this idea of the show as a branding exercise, and to me that he really is putting a lot out there in a way that perhaps he hasn't done. Maybe even it's just like the runway with the moss and that kind of a thing.
I mean,
well, I don't know exactly what goes on in his mind, and none of us know, but one thing that I feel is that actually here he's following some trends or picking up on some trends more than usual, you know, like the bare midriff, the sheer fabrics, the prints that clashes, the, you know, cool, relaxed, hippie chic, whatever. But in his own way, so it's as if he was quoting it with some fun, because as you said, you said it verges on ugly sometimes, which is very true. But you know, it's it's good to photograph, it's photogenic, it's all of that people are looking for. You know, like, oh my God, look the way she's dressed. And I think he does it in a very smart way. Does it make sense what I just said?
Yeah, it does.
I was a bit confused,
No, it makes sense.
And they're all pieces that stand out. They're going to be very different on their own to anything anyone else is doing. So even though, but I mean, in a way, when designers, like, he's following some of the trends, but it feels, that's why it feels right to everyone a little bit. Because if it was something so nothing to do with anything anyone was doing this season, then people would feel, it might take a while for people to say, oh, actually this does feel right, because you wouldn't feel it straight away.
Yeah. So it stands out, but it fits in, which is a perfect kind of dichotomy for Dries.
But you know, as much in other, even important ones, I felt that there is a little bit the Hedy or the Nicholas effect, or, you know, the less is more, or streetwear in a casual yet very expensive way. You know, it has taken off, but it's normal. Every era has the designers that make it, you know, their influence. And what I like about this is that I don't feel that at all.
No,
I mean, it's just him picking up on some trends, but not trying to pick up on the commercially.
But it's also interesting because everyone's kind of, I think you had the whole normcore thing, and there's been a bit of a response to that with people doing stuff that's kind of the return to dressing up. And this is interesting because it's a complete kind of opposite proposal to normcore, but it's also nothing, it's still very relaxed and very dressed down. And I think that's interesting because I think people have kind of been like, oh, there's normcore and casual, or there's like, you know, ornate, opulent, dressed up. And I find this interesting because it kind of sits in a category of its own. It's not, it's ornate and it's fussy in some ways, but it's still very comfortable and casual. So, which
did you notice that nobody did evening wear anymore?
But I
I'm
think
wondering what the poor red carpet girls will wear at the autumn.
Well, no, we're
There's
London, because in London everyone does evening wear. That's the interesting
Yeah, it's
thing.
true.
Yeah.
I think this is Dries's dream of evening wear, though.
Yeah.
I think this is how he
Exactly.
wishes that the
Exactly.
red carpet looked, because it
Yeah.
is very elegant and it's really feminine in its own way. And I mean, it's probably fine enough in its materials and in its production to be evening wear. It's just not what we're used to, because we're used to the mermaid. And of course, it's not a mermaid, but this is amazing evening wear. I would love it if the red carpet looked like this.
Yeah,
Me too.
And if it was covered with
unfortunately, it will be very mermaid.
I think this is him servicing his customer.
Yeah.
This is what his customer wants to feel comfortable at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's still very in the realm of everything he does every season. So it's not like out of step with that.
No,
and he's got his customer in mind, obviously. He knows who that person is, even if we can't quite define who it is. He knows, because this is
And
who it
of
is.
course, as you pointed out, we can't know what's on his mind, but it wouldn't surprise me if next season, which would also kind of be a bit coordinated with spring 2014, he would go more in the kind of spring 2015 menswear direction, with the natural fabrics and the kind of dress down. I think it's the ballet, but it's not even the ballet. It's almost like the ballet off stage.
Yeah, exactly.
The ballet
Which
warming
everyone is
up
doing. Bottega did as well. It's all kind of that weird.
Yeah, well, that's
collective
those kind of
consciousness.
kind of sexy menswear, kind of showing off some
The
skin
straps
and
and
stuff. But yeah, so I mean, it could also be a kind of apex of something, like, okay, this is kind of so rich, that then kind of turns into something very different for next season. But as you were saying, I mean, it's interesting, that thing that it's hard to point out which pieces are from which season when it comes to Dries, of course. And I guess that's also very comfortable, because we are tired of statement pieces, aren't we? I mean, even that word, statement this and statement that, it's become the most overused word in fashion.
That's the real smartness to me for this collection. That's my biggest takeaway, is it's a collection full of statement pieces, but none of them feel seasonal. And I wonder if that's because there are so many in there, because I think that I feel like the normcore thing came out of this idea that people just didn't want to buy something that stood out, because if it stood out, then you could tell what season it was from. So it almost became this kind of point blank idea that something opulent or printed or coloured or in your face was throwaway because it was associated with the season. And I feel like this is so interesting because it's all of those things, but it would be really, really hard to pinpoint pieces. And I think that's a really interesting concept, to be able to cater to that woman who does want really in your face fashion, but who wants stuff with longevity. And I don't think anyone's doing that smartly enough. You know, even if you buy, like, you know, the Prada face coats, you know what season they're from. And it's the same with a lot of kind of designers that work with print, like the Mary Catranzo shoe print, you know what season it's from. But these pieces, they're so, I think it's because they're so mixed, it's not really.
I think everyone looks to Prada to make a statement for that season, and in a way, like, she backs that all up, and every season it's like, well, it's about this, and everyone's trying to work out what it's about, and they ask her and all that.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, you never see half of that stuff in the stores anyway. So it's like she's making a statement about her intellectual thought process for that season, and everyone has discussions about it, and then they sell loads of black bags and black coats. You know, so it's like it's almost like a completely different idea to this, because actually you can date every single Prada collection. And you know, she is a super intellectual woman. I mean, she has amazing ideas, and you know, every season comes up with something that you don't expect, but that feels right, and challenges what everyone thinks about certain ideas. But at the same time, it's totally dateable. Like, everyone knows, and not just because everyone's, you know, studied the show, but because it's really dateable. Like, the ideas are from that season, and they don't feel right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Except her classics.
Well,
which are many. I mean, there is the fashion show in the big stores, in the flagships. There's always, but then, and that's where you notice the difference between. I mean, I still wear some cardigans from 15 years ago. And they're very Prada, but they're just cardigans, you know. and you can still have those a little bit rigid black trousers, and they go. I mean, you change the shoes,
and the coats,
they go. But then
the main ideas from those collections,
exactly,
the things that you would take away from the collection, that those pieces you can date them very easily.
You can wear it then 10 years later, and it's vintage Prada. But the next season, it's last season.
Well, maybe it's to do with is there something in the kind of privately owned brands that makes them want to do something that's less seasonal because they have clearer aesthetics? Because it's interesting, you know, Rick Owens, I don't think his clothes feel like they're tied to a particular season in the same way at all. We're saying Dries doesn't. We talked about Armani, it's exactly the same. You know, Armani, it doesn't feel seasonal. No. So is there something in it when brands are privately owned?
It's just different DNA. I wouldn't say it's like because they're privately owned, they're doing something that's totally different. I'd say, you know, this is Dries's DNA. These are the kinds of pieces that he does. It's always print. And, you know, Prada's coming up with a very specific intellectual concept every season. So it's just I don't know. I don't think it's because they're privately owned. I just think it's, you know, it's because of a totally different DNA that each individual.
Yeah, I agree. But then there is also more freedom. You know, if you're the owner of your own brand, nobody can tell you what to do, which not always happens in the big group. But I also think that it's quite. I was thinking about a brand that we can define like that in a group, maybe Loewe. I mean, I wouldn't probably imagine. I wouldn't say, oh, that's Loewe 3 seasons ago, you know.
Yeah.
But that might happen now.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I mentioned
Whereas
it.
Before,
that was
I mean, it's probably because I don't think the clothes weren't massively memorable from season to season. It wasn't about
the leather
clothes.
was beautiful and that's it. But no. So I don't know if it's because you belong to a group or not. Or
But we never want Dries to stop being Dries.
No, it was really good. It would be interesting to see this in a showroom, you know, outside of the styling of the show, where you see every piece, and I think there's so many amazing things in there.
There's so much stuff there.
I think it's quite convincing. I mean, this isn't my style at all, but I would, you know, it kind of convinces you to try it out, doesn't it?
I'm going to go home and start layering pyjamas.
Loads of prints and pyjamas.
Look utterly ridiculous, and then be back here tomorrow wearing all black. Well, should we give him a round of applause for kicking off Paris Fashion Week?
Thank you.